Hey, everybody, welcome back into Strictly Speaking here on True Blue. I'm Bob Frantz, and today we're going to have some fun. Bart Sibrel is an award-winning filmmaker and writer and investigative journalist who's been producing television programs and documentaries for over 40 years, but he, of course, is best known perhaps as the world's leading proponent of conspiracy theories that mankind has never walked on the surface of the moon and that NASA faked the entire mission to, landing on, and return from the moon in 1969. His work and his assertions are so controversial that scientists and astrophysicists and others are lining up to challenge his credibility. For example, watch this.
In 1969, Apollo 11 was the first manned mission to land on the moon, or was it? In recent weeks, we've seen Tucker Carlson, Patrick Bet-David, and Joe Rogan and Bart Sibrel discuss conspiracy theories suggesting that the moon landing was a fake. It really pisses me off. As is the only thing we all should agree upon that's a net good for Americans and the whole world. In NASA's footage, you can clearly see the flag waving, even though there's no atmosphere in the moon. There are also no stars seen in the footage, and the radiation levels in the Van Allen radiation belts surrounding the Earth would have been lethal to the astronauts, since NASA had not developed adequate shielding technology to protect them back then. Right? Wrong. Usually I don't waste my time trying to debunk claims like these because I don't think such people can be reasoned with. They're not interested in debate. They're interested in sensationalism. But in the recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience featuring notorious conspiracy theorist Bart Sibrel really compelled me to break that rule. Having people like Sibrel cast aspersions on NASA's credibility, historic achievements, and contributions to our safety every time we get on a plane just could not be left aside.
So he didn't want to leave it aside. I don't want to leave it aside. I want to dive into this. Rogan had his turn. So did Patrick Bet-David. Today it's our turn. Bart Sibrel, his latest work is his memoir, Moon Man, which details, among other things, his place on a CIA hit list. What? Yeah. So today we head to the moon or to a soundstage, depending on who you believe and what you believe. Coming up on Strictly Speaking. Bart Sibrel, it is so good to have you, man. You don't remember this because you've probably done 5,000 interviews over the last 30 or 40 years. I talked to you on my radio program about 10, 15 years ago, but it's good to talk to you again. How the hell are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm good, thank you. How many interviews do you do a year? Have you ever tracked all of the public publicity that you've generated with your work?
No.
No, you have no idea.
It's one of those things. Cloudy and sunny, cloudy and sunny. It is what it is. You know, I wish it were a theory that they faked the moon landing. The fact is they did. And if I went around saying that Mickey Mouse was the first president of the United States and not George Washington, I suspect there wouldn't be 1,000 videos on YouTube defending the fact that George Washington was really the first president. Why would they bother? Why would this guy bother? Why would this guy be so offended if it hasn't become a god to this person? And the fact is, with today's best technology, which is 5 decades better than what they claimed they had, back in 1969, they can only send astronauts 1,000th the distance to the moon. Now, when the light bulb was invented, we have light bulbs today. When they did powered airplane flight for the first time, you can today get on an airplane and go for a flight. When they split the atom, today they can split the atom. But for some reason, with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, they can get on a rocket and go to the moon. And then 5 decades later, you can get on a rocket and only go 1,000th the distance to the moon, even with 5 decades better technology. The fact is, they did fake the moon landing, and the first proof is simply that logic. You
Well,
can't have better
that is
technology in the
logic.
past and in the future.
Yeah, that is logic, though, but that is just an assertion that says because they haven't done something, they cannot do something again. And we're going to dive into all of that. Believe me, I'm going to give you plenty of time. The guy who did the video that I played in the intro, just so that people can, there's a lot of those out there. You're exactly right. That is Professor Brian Keating from UC San Diego. He's an astrophysicist or something like that. Are you familiar with him at all?
No.
Okay.
Mm.
He's one of those. He did about a 48-minute or so video to quote unquote debunk the stuff that you brought up in your interview with Rogan, which, by the way, has set your work on fire again. I mean, the fact that you got on the most popular podcast in the world and had that 3 hours with Joe really kind of brought this all up again, which is why we reached out. And I'm so glad to have you. But Brian Keating is one of a lot of guys who have jumped up and said, I'll do it.
The fact is, they did fake the moon landing. You can't have greater technology in the past and in the future. That it's not just an assertion; it's an historic proof that
Okay.
there's never been a technological breakthrough that no one could do 50 years later. It's never happened. You cannot have greater technology in the
No,
past and in the future.
I
If
don't,
they could go to the moon on the first attempt with 1 millionth of computing power cell phone, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, and there'd be bases over the moon because just 10 years after the first atomic bombs were 1,000 times more powerful. So, how can we only go 1,000th the distance to the moon with 50 years better technology?
I have
They
asked
faked it.
I have asked a
Whether
lot of
people accept
questions.
it or not, they faked it.
I have asked a lot of those same questions myself, not necessarily the part about the 1/1000th, but about why we haven't gone to Mars or been able to go anywhere else other than that celestial body. But the reason I asked you if you convinced Joe is because one of the things that in your conversation with him at the very end, he said, look, I mean, I think he was on the precipice of saying that you're right, we didn't go there, but he said, I want to have a debate. I want to have a debate between you and an expert. And so Brian Keating is one of those who did a 48-minute video saying he's debunking all of this stuff you said there and all of your work. There's another guy on Twitter.
Well, he's already contradicted himself. He says, "I don't do debunking videos," and then
And
he
then he
does
did.
the
Okay,
debunking video.
fair enough.
Just
Yeah,
like Edgar Mitchell says, "I don't hit people," and 5 seconds later he hits me from behind.
there's a
You know,
no, I got you.
what's the point? If they went to the moon, then anybody who
I
says otherwise is an idiot. So why is this guy spending all this time and energy to edit videos to convince idiots that they really went to the moon? He says it's offensive to
yeah.
him that I'm disregarding the reputation of the honorable federal government, whose own defense secretary said he and the CIA rigged the start of the Vietnam War. They said the Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened. They made it up, and Congress passed a law starting a war that killed 58,220 of their own people. And then Bobby Kennedy Jr. says, hey, the CIA killed my uncle. So I think if they're willing to kill their own president and kill 58,000 of their own soldiers, I don't think they have a problem faking a video image. This
I
has
think
become a
government
god to people
credibility is
like
a
him.
huge issue. I do, Bart. Don't get me wrong. I think government credibility is a huge issue here. But what I just want to get to the part of the question here is there's another guy who's a rocket orientation specialist with 1.8 million followers, and I checked his work out too. It's pretty in depth. These are two of probably a lot of guys who have said, I'll debate him. Because Joe said, will you come back on here and debate an expert who wants to challenge your assertions? And you
Well, they're not experts. Let me point that out. Okay, you can be sincere and be sincerely wrong. I'm the accuser. I'm not accusing Boy Scouts who naively believe that their scoutmaster isn't a molester when he is. I'm not accusing them. I'm accusing the NASA administrator. I'm accusing the Apollo astronauts. Why don't you have Charles Duke, who has the audacity to claim to be a Christian, while he's associated with homicides to cover this up? That's who I'm accusing. That's who I'm debating, not naive people who
no,
are the
no,
victims
and
of
believe me,
the
if we
people
could
I'm
get you in the
accusing,
same room with some of
right?
those folks, that would be great. But I'm just saying, you're going to present here in a few minutes what you've presented in a lot of places. You're going to present evidence, photographic and video and audio, and a whole lot of things here. And you've analyzed them through, all of your, decades of doing this. What I'm asking you is if you have some other people just like you, and they're in the field, like I said, in the scientific fields, to analyze the same evidence that you're presenting and go toe to toe with you, will you do that? Are you planning to have that conversation on whatever platform, whether it's a Rogan or a TV show or whatever?
Well, like I said, I have no plans to debate any victims of NASA. My plan is to debate. Why don't we have NASA administrator? You know what the NASA administrator just said about a month ago? He said, on the far side of the moon, the side of the moon that doesn't face the Earth, it's always dark. Uh, then what about a solar eclipse? Doesn't he realize there's a 14-day and a 14-day night on the far side of the moon, just like on the side of the moon facing us? I know that from 8th grade science, and the administrator of NASA doesn't know that. This shows you the incompetence of the people at NASA.
Okay.
The administrator does not know science. I mean, come on.
Do you welcome debate with just average people though? And the reason I ask that is when I watched your video, the funny thing happened on the way to the moon, which I've watched 3 or 4 times now. The most recent time earlier today, just to prep for this, and I wanted to see, are you convincing people? And I went down, but comments are turned off. Do you not want to hear from people who want to agree with you or disagree with you
Oh, you're talking about on my channel?
on your
I
yeah your
mean,
YouTube?
why would I give an assassin bullets to shoot me with? I mean, I don't want to spend my time editing out curse words on my channel. I
No,
don't
but
think
you might
Time
have
Magazine
assassins who want to.
allows
Yeah, but you
people
might
to
have
edit
defenders.
their content. You know
But
what I
you might
mean?
have defenders on there too, Bart, who wanna take shots at your assassins,
It's not
metaphorically, of course.
I present the evidence and people can decide for themselves. That's the way it should be, and that's what I've done.
I
You
like to
you
see
can
the debate, though. You know what I mean? I like to see people say Bart Sibrel is right on. There's no freaking way with what we know about and what scientists and NASA tell us about the Van Allen radiation belt. Bart is right on, and I want somebody else to come back and say no, but they don't talk about this, and somebody else say you missed that.
Well, why don't
You know
we
what I'm
show the
saying?
clip?
Because
You
that's
brought
how
it
we
up,
get.
Bob. Cue it up. Clip number 4. Let's
Okay.
have Kelly Smith. He's an engineer at NASA,
If
right?
you had to
We
rank that part, and we'll start there because I just came up organically, but Brian Keating, the professor that I played that intro clip for, his claim is that your number one piece of evidence is the shadows, the parallel shadows. I didn't catch that. I didn't, in my opinion, I think the number one issue is the radiation belt. I think there are a
well,
lot of things. The
we have
shadows.
yeah
He
we have
said,
4 proofs that would prove it independently in a court of law if people had an open mind. I talked to a college
is
professor
one bigger
like
than the
him.
others, though, Bart?
Well, I'm sorry.
Is one of them like your number one? This is my whole card right here. This is one.
Well,
Is
I think
it
you
the
can prove the
shadows?
moon landing fraud with that one picture that you have queued up from the email I sent you of shadows, which in
Shadows.
sunlight are always parallel. I mean, come on. The sun is a million times brighter than the earth. It's 93 million miles away. It's going to cast shadows in the same direction over an entire continent or moon. Go
Mhm.
outside at noon on a cloudless day in your parking lot or front yard.
Put that picture up.
Look at 2 telephone poles, 2 trees. They
Yeah.
are always parallel with one another. That photograph on the right, they claim, was taken on the moon from the quote last mission to the moon, where an astronaut shadow is going at 12 o'clock and a rock 5 feet away is going at 9 o'clock. I mean, that's a 90-degree difference from shadows from objects 5 feet apart. It's impossible for them to intersect in sunlight, which means it was taken, move, pan it to the other side so we can see the shadows. There we go. And that means it was taken with electrical light, which means it's on Earth. That's all the proof that you need. Now, the problem is this is an emotional attachment to people. Bob, I've talked to a college professor teaching aerospace at a major university who said out of his own mouth, if even Neil Armstrong himself confessed that the moon landings were fake, he would still think he walked on the moon anyway, and he calls me not open minded when he's in that same group. He is not open minded to the truth. I've proved I'm open minded. I used to worship the moon landings. I had a shrine in my house since I was a child to the Apollo 11 glorious moon landings. Isn't it wonderful? And I had to face facts. The government kills their own people. They lie continually. There was no independent press coverage. They cannot go to the moon today. They can only go 1,000th of the moon today. We have shadows intersecting. We have a NASA engineer saying that the radiation that surrounds the Earth, if you were to go through it to the moon and back, you would be killed. And the technology to do so has not been invented yet. That's NASA saying that. We have an eyewitness who saw them film the fake moon landing at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. We have classified footage of the crew of Apollo 11 using a 1 foot model of the Earth, pretending it's the Earth floating in space. You've seen it yourself. My critics
I have.
agree that that's them faking being halfway to the moon. I don't know what the problem is. People will not admit that they're wrong. They think they know better than Neil Armstrong, and this has become Santa Claus for adults like that
Okay.
guy. And
Okay.
he's defending murderers. He's defending the people deceiving him. Mark Twain said, "It is easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. And if a college professor teaching aerospace says, if a confession from Neil Armstrong, who said it was fake, that he would still believe he walked on the moon anyway, I'm telling you, these people have made a god out of putting a man on the moon. And it's a false god. And that's the way it is. Go to Sibrel.com and you can see all these clips for free. Click on the Moon Man video link button that we're going to show. You can watch all this for free. And you have to come to the same sad conclusion that I did and many other people are recanting. I've proven I've had an open mind. I used to believe they were real. I worshiped them. And I have to face the hard, cold facts that they did fake the moon landing. That's the
I
way
want
that
you
it
to know,
is.
I want you to know, Bart, that I'm sitting here right now with an open mind. I am ready to be convinced. I mean, I was very impressed and interested in everything you presented to Joe and some of the other things you've done. Even going back to when I talked to you over a decade ago, I've been open minded. I have not yet pulled the trigger and checked the box that said they were absolutely fake, but I am absolutely not able to say what is wrong with you people. Of course, we went to the moon. I am absolutely open minded about this, so I really want to get somewhere. You mentioned two things before we get to the Van Allen, because put the picture back up there if you want. When you point out the parallel shadow theory, it's not theory, that's a fact, that's a simple fact. You're right about, sunlight, it's going to cast the shadows always, parallel with one another and not intersecting. Is there any room for the possibility that there was a second light source coming off of the lander, something that of course was lit up there that cast a shadow on a rock that put it in that direction while the
Well,
shadow.
whatever the light source is, it's go back to the proof there. There you go. Whatever the light source is, you can see it's the same length as the object. The shadow of the rock and the rock are about the same length, and the same with the astronaut. So it's the same light, whatever
Mhm.
it is. So whatever the
So you're
light
saying
is
the same,
the
so you're saying
same.
the same light that is behind the astronaut casting the shadow this way is
It's
going
an
to be the same.
identical light on the rock, so it's identical because the shadow length is the same. Secondly, without an atmosphere on the moon, according to NASA, the sunlight is 20 times brighter than a desert at noon. So go outside on a sunny day and shine a flashlight on the ground and see if you can see the flashlight. You can't. So I don't care what secondary light source there is, it's not going to compete against sunlight on Earth, and it's certainly not going to compete against sunlight on the moon, which is 20 times brighter. It's irrelevant. I mean, it's amazing. The guy said out of his own mouth, there's no proof, not even a confession of an eyewitness that would make him recant the glorious moon landings, which proves this has become a god to these people. They're irrational. He says it makes him angry because I'm offending his God. That's why.
Yeah.
Why
No,
should
you're
he
right.
care?
There,
If they really went to the moon, why does he care? He cares because it's emotional, which proves he's not thinking clearly.
can I ask you a question?
Mhm.
Why do you care? You've been doing this
Well,
for most
because
of
a
your
murderer
life.
is
It's
that
a
loose.
passion for your
Bob,
life.
this is why it matters. Okay. Let's just
Mhm.
say you and I are neighbors. We live in a neighborhood and one child goes missing a month for the last 50 years. Do we say, well, it's just one of those things? No, we have people who have admitted out of their own mouth they fabricated the beginning of the Vietnam War, which killed 3 million people, including 58,220 of their own soldiers. We have Bobby Kennedy Jr., who has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone, who says his researched opinion is, with 100% certainty, the CIA killed President Kennedy because he was going to shut down that organization. Okay. Then we have 3,000 architects and engineers who sign an affidavit risking their livelihoods and their reputation, saying it's mechanically impossible for a pinhole going in and out of the grid to cause its collapse. Just look at a picture of the Oklahoma City bombing building. Half the building's blown away. It's rock solid. So if they're willing to kill 3,000 of their own people, 58,000 of their own soldiers, their own president, I not think they're going to have a problem faking an image of a video when there's no independent press coverage. These people are at large. We have child molesters, we have murderers. My book at Sibrel.com that I read myself in audio, Kindle or print, contains information not in my film, including my 4-hour interview with the widow of the man who is going to be the first man to walk on the moon. And she told me that days before he died, he held an impromptu press conference without permission, where he took a bunch of reporters to the top of the rocket where he fixed a lemon the size of a grapefruit, calling the equipment a piece of junk. They wouldn't fix anything. He complained to his senator, to his congressman. He was preparing reports to give to Congress about how they were a decade away. She told me on January 26, 1967, he came home from work and said the following: Hon, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad today inspecting the equipment. I've been here for years. Why is the CIA suddenly showing up today, the very next day he's dead from faulty equipment? She said, not me, that the CIA killed her husband and two other men. So we have a government that not only takes a third of our income to fake moon landings, they use that to pay the salaries of CIA agents to kill our neighbors who are trying to expose their crimes. It matters because these people are on the loose. And we have naive Boy Scouts like this person defending his own Scoutmaster molester. It's, and
So
can you do?
this was
Because
supposed to
this
be
is a
the astronaut.
prideful thing.
This was supposed to be
Whoever
the
shot,
astronaut on
yeah,
Apollo
go ahead,
11.
Bob. What's that?
This is supposed to be the astronaut on Apollo 11. This was supposed to be the first man to walk on the moon. You're talking
Gus Grissom was going to be the first man to walk on the moon because he was the most beloved of all the astronauts. He had a problem with his Mercury spacecraft. When it hit the ocean, the explosive bolts on the door went off. It caused the thing to bob under the water. It filled up with water, started to sink. He came out, had a press conference, kind of an embarrassment, a mistake, right? And then at the press conference, he admitted something else. He loved kids and he had these rolls of nickels from the bank in his pockets that he was going to give to his son, who I interviewed for 3 hours, who said he was killed by the CIA. And he was going to give it to him at the time in the third grade to give to his friends to say this nickel has been in outer space. So when he started sinking to the bottom of the ocean with this extra weight in his pocket, he said maybe that wasn't such a brilliant idea. Everyone laughed and was endeared to him. Then some reporter asked the following, Bob. He said, were you afraid? And he said, of course I was afraid. And everybody loved his honesty. He was going to be. They said, this is the guy. And he knew something was wrong. In my film, it's only shown for a few seconds. I don't even bring attention to it, the narration. But 6 weeks before they go to the moon, they're doing a rehearsal of picking up a rock in front of reporters. Neil Armstrong's got a stick with a bag on it to pick up a rock. The bag falls off the stick. They can't get that to work, much less, batteries and life support system and rockets. And so this is the guy who held a press conference without permission days before he died, calling the rocket a piece of junk in front of the national media, who said the CIA suddenly showed up, started flashing their badges, inspecting the equipment, and he was dead the next day from faulty equipment. His wife says he was murdered by the CIA. His son, who's a 747 pilot, says he's murdered by the CIA. This is why it matters, Bob. These are murderers that we're treating like heroes, that this naive Boy Scout and many like him are defending because they have made a god out of this. You see, whoever killed Kennedy, he's still dead. It's just a matter of changing who did it and why. Or 9/11, all those people are dead. You can change who did it and why. This is a positive lie. Remember Mark Twain, it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. This
about.
guy refuses to admit that he's wrong. I've admitted I was wrong. Many other people have admitted that they're wrong. They used to believe the moon landings are real. Now they know better. Our government is that corrupt. There was no independent press coverage. Eugene Krantz, flight director, says a guy in the command center can tell no difference whatsoever between a simulation and a quote real flight, just a bunch of numbers going by on a screen. So if a guy in the command center can't tell the difference, I don't think we could tell the difference watching it as a 10-year-old on television, right?
Who did Kranz say that to?
Well, he said it to a reporter. He admitted it during a documentary that they can't tell the difference. He also said that they intentionally destroyed all the telemetry data as to where the rocket really was. NASA also said they intentionally destroyed all the original videotapes. NASA also said they intentionally destroyed all the hardware, all the schematics, all the blueprints. That has never been done in the history of the world. There's never been a technological achievement that you could do in the past that you can't do now.
Did
And
they
there's
offer
never
an
been a
explanation?
time in the history of the world where they spent $250 billion and destroyed the technology, which they would never do if they really went, but that's exactly what they would do to cover their tracks of a fraud. So
What
there
is
you go, another proof that they didn't go.
what is their explanation for the destruction of all of the all of the video and all of the telemetry, everything you just said? I mean, they can't just say, yeah, we trashed it for no good reason. What was their explanation for the greatest achievement in mankind's history to not save every single thing that made it happen?
That is what they said. They said they destroyed it and they didn't offer a reason.
They
Go
didn't
go
offer
to
any
Sabrel,
explanation.
go to Sabrel.com. It's one of the free clips. We have Don Pettit, a NASA astronaut, saying they intentionally destroyed the moon technology. I mean, come
I want
on.
to play.
You're gonna maybe they should have destroyed the atomic bomb, after World War II, but 10 years later, it's 1,000 times more powerful. Come on, it's been 50 years. It should be easier to go to the moon. Elon Musk just said in order to go to the moon, it's going to take 8 fuel trips first. We found documents of von Braun saying the same thing. So if you have to make 8 fuel trips first with a rocket slightly taller than the Saturn V, how did the Saturn V do it exactly? And that's why they destroyed all the schematics. You can't sit there on the lunar surface with a bunch of car batteries and power air conditioning down to 72 degrees against 250 degrees outside. It can't be done. That's why they destroy the schematics, because some engineer can prove it. There's so many videos coming out now. I just saw one where they're analyzing the angles of the light and all this and that with math, proving that it was a fake set. In fact, AI, Google's AI in November, okay, the smartest AI on the world, it's multiple AIs hooked up together. They had a conference. Some people had it write a symphony, write a novel. Another group fed it special deepfake detection program. Never been wrong, could tell you whether a video of Biden or Trump is real in 1 second. They fed it pictures from the Chinese probes unmanned on the lunar surface of pictures that said it's real. They fed them Apollo pictures, ding, 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 fake foreground, fake background. Every Apollo picture they fed it said it was fake for multiple reasons. So either Google's decade-long $1 billion investment of the smartest AI on the world is a piece of junk, or they faked the moon landings.
Is that on
So
your? Is that Google AI story? Is that on your website as well?
yeah, go to Sabrel.com, scroll down to the bottom to the YouTube channel, and it's one of the videos on my YouTube channel. There's a
Okay.
video of them showing this with Putin there looking at it. Do you realize, Bob? And look at the video of this later. If you go to the original source of that Russian article, I did a screenshot of it. That's the video. It says if you proceed to the article, the original article showing that the AI just concluded the moon landings are fake, all the data on your computer will be stolen and you'll be associated with child pornography. It says it right there. I
Wow.
mean, that's how desperate they are to
Okay.
cover up the fact that the world's smartest supercomputer just said the moon landings are fake.
So you just threw a lot of science and a little bit of math into this whole thing, and I want to do that again with Van Allen. But before we get into the science, I want to go to just the emotional part of it and the God part of it. You talked about the fact that for a lot of people, this is like a religion. You said that, and I can't remember who it was that said a scientist or professor that you talked to said if Neil Armstrong himself confessed that it never happened, he still would believe that they went. Let's pull up the YouTube video, or maybe it's a Twitter video of Bart with Neil Armstrong asking him to swear on the Bible. Yep, there it is. Grab that one. So this isn't Neil Armstrong doing what you just said, confessing that we didn't go, but this is your attempt to get him to say that we absolutely did without any equivocation. Let's watch this.
Mr. Armstrong, Bart Sibrel, ABC Digital. Wanted to give you the opportunity to swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon. Will you put your left hand on the Bible and swear to God that you walked on the moon?
Gentlemen. Mr. Sibrel.
Yes? If you really walked on the moon, why would you not do that? So why don't you just put the end to the record in the argument and put your hand on the Bible, swear to God you walked on the moon. You have $5,000.
The meeting is not open.
Well, you have $5,000 cash. You can give it to charity if you swear on the Bible that you walked on the moon. So why don't you put your hand on the Bible and swear to God that you walked on the moon?
Now, you made a lot of enemies when you did that. You made a lot of people upset, and I think it's largely because of what you said a few moments ago. People are religious about this experience. Neil Armstrong is a national and, in fact, a humanity hero. So is Buzz Aldrin. So is Collins. All of those who were, a part of this are heroes, and you went after him like that. How do you, when you look back at that now, and Neil Armstrong, of course, has passed away, I think in 2012 or something like that. Was that his de facto confession that I didn't go when he wouldn't even put his hand on the Bible to say so?
Well, a better one, if you want to cue up the very end of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which is on the homepage of Sibrel.com, he says something very interesting on the 25th anniversary. He only gives interviews if the president of the United States asks him to. In fact, two of the three guys on the first mission will not give an interview unless the president asks them to. They don't want to talk about it. In fact, you know how many pictures, still pictures, there are of Neil Armstrong, first man on the moon, standing there on the surface? There's zero. I went to the archives myself, the vault, opened the door. Many employees went in and out, scratching their heads, looking for a picture of Neil Armstrong on the moon, and there aren't any. He refused to have his picture taken. He refused to stand on the Bible. Cue up that part. I think it's Dylan, right? Your
Well,
assistant.
help me out.
And he says perhaps someday, see, they're in the White House. It's the 25th anniversary. They have students, the future, there holding back tears. Neil Armstrong says, perhaps someday you'll be able to remove one of truth's protective layers. They're not heroes, they're traitors. When people take an oath to this country, whether in the military or law enforcement, they say to defend the Constitution, not a dictator, not a president writing executive orders, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You know who killed Kennedy? An American. You know who did the Gulf of Tonkin lie? An American. You know who did 9/11? An American. You know who faked the moon landing? An American. You know who was the CIA agents who killed the crew of Apollo 1? American, right? We have
Okay.
traitors that are called national heroes. How sad is that?
Okay, we could do 1,000 shows on all of those things that you just said, but do you have a timestamp on what you're talking about on A Funny Thing Happened as far as when Armstrong's has that?
Well, I could cue it up, go toward probably about maybe 44 minutes into it, something like that.
I'll let Dylan look for that spot while I
Yeah,
ask you.
right there. Go back a little bit.
Okay.
Back, right there. Right there. Right when you see the wide shot of Neil Armstrong. And it's coming up. You could, play it without the audio down. I'll tell you when to bring up the audio.
No,
Yeah, that's the administrator of NASA. That's them at their first press conference. Look at their expressions. They look like they're at the funeral of their mother. And now here is Neil Armstrong speaking, where he says those cryptic words about truth's protective layers.
Before the next generation of taxpayers as they toured the White House.
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you, we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
So the moon landing fraud has a truth protective layer around it. What a surprise. The guy's not a hero. And
so you took that. Hold on.
Astronauts.
Hold on, Bart. I just want to. So you took that line to mean that, essentially that we're not telling the truth. It's being protected. The real truth is, and we didn't go, and we need you guys to figure this out later. That's what you took it to mean. What if his meaning there, his intention was simply, we did take the first step. He said, what we've done is just a beginning. We did take the first step. We literally walked on the moon. There's so much more that we're going to do after this, and you're going to discover the truths that are out there that nobody had access to before. What if that was his intention?
Well, it says in the ancient texts, in order to perceive the truth, you have to have eyes that see and ears that hear. people can go and watch that for themselves. Many people find that an odd thing to be saying with tears in your eyes, that the moon landing involves the truth's protective layers. Dylan had queued up Buzz Aldrin accidentally admitting to a little girl, I think it's like 9, 10 years ago, that they did not go to the moon. He says so right out of his mouth. Why can't we go back to the moon now? A little girl asked, and he says, well, because we didn't go there. And if we didn't, then it's good to know why we didn't. You know what I mean? The guy slipped up and
I got
admitted it.
okay.
You can make excuses
So
for him saying we didn't go to the moon. You can make excuses for why Neil Armstrong
I'm
is
not making
tearfully saying
excuses for
that it
anybody.
involves truth protective
No, no,
layers. You can
no,
make
no.
excuses why the shadows intersect. You can make excuses why Cyrus Eugene Akers, the chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base, as he's dying, fearing the judgment of God, first says, and you may not know this, Bob, because it's not in the book because his son was still alive. Okay, a guy who was chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base. Keep in mind, every military branch has their intelligence division. The Army has it, the Navy has it, and the Air Force has it. And it's at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico. Cyrus Eugene Akers was the chief of security at the Intelligence Division of the United States Air Force. Bill Casing, a NASA contractor with high security clearance, said the moon landing was faked by the United States Air Force, and it was done at their intelligence division. As he's dying, fearing the judgment of God, and for those who believe in God, confessing sin helps you be forgiven and entering God's grace into heaven. The first thing he says, Bob, is I'm a murderer. I killed somebody as he's dying. His son says, well, Dad, who did you kill? He said, well, I killed a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. The son immediately calls in the military police to investigate it so that the victim's family can have closure. They say, why did you kill him? He says, well, we both eyewitnessed the filming of the moon landing on a fake moon set that was built in an airplane hangar over several weeks. They brought in the lunar module, they brought in fake lunar soil, they painted the walls matte black. President Johnson showed up for the first of 3 days of filming. He gave me a list of 15 people who were allowed in. Neil Armstrong's on the list, Buzz Aldrin is on the list. He kept it as a souvenir. We published it in the book at Sibrel.com. And then he said his coworker, who was helping him fake the moon landing, thought it was morally wrong, which it was. And he said he was going to tell a reporter. And we were told if we did that, we would be killed. So I took it as my duty to kill him, to cover up the moon landing fraud. So
I
we have
watched
shadows intersecting at 90 degrees. We have the fact that you can't have greater technology in the past and in the future. We have that
okay.
video footage you haven't shown of them using a 1-foot model to fake being halfway to the moon, dated 2 days into the flight. And we have an eyewitness who saw them fake it. And again, that's not good enough for people. Neil Armstrong
Okay.
confessing himself isn't good enough for those Boy Scouts who have made a god out of the glorious science moon landing. You
Okay,
know,
time
so
out,
be
time
it.
out. Let me dig into some of this stuff because there's some work that has to be done here. First of all, like I said at the beginning, I'm sitting here ready to be convinced. I'm ready to be swayed. So I'm not trying to make excuses when I say, what if this is what Armstrong was saying, because science doesn't lie. The facts can be the facts. The parallels can be parallels. But some things like words, you have to do interpretation. What do you think he meant?
Oh,
Here's
yeah,
what
I
I think.
understand that. That in and of
So
itself isn't
that's number
proof.
one.
It's just
No, I
kind of
know, it's
odd.
not, but I just want that
It's
to be that
odd
part
that
to be
there's
made.
all this proof that they did not go to the moon,
Yeah,
and then when you add that to it, then it
right.
makes sense.
That kind of helps
Yeah.
put it over the edge for you. I get it. Now, the other part about this, or the next part about this, um, that deathbed confession. What I and a lot of people through the years who have said, and I'm talking about younger years, of course we went to the moon. I mean, how many people were involved? Do you know how many people would have had to have been lying for their entire lives? You'd think that somebody, maybe on their deathbed would say, by the way, we faked this or we did that or something. And what were there? Some 200,000 people involved in the Apollo program with NASA at the time?
But that excuse
200.
doesn't fly. That's people, grabbing at straws. The fact is,
Well,
during
but it's
World War
a
II,
legitimate
well,
question though. Why
Bob,
would only one person out of
because
how many who
they
knew that
will
it was
kill
fake?
you if you do. For example,
Well,
I'm
we're talking deathbed
confirming.
confessions,
Let me tell you. Okay,
right?
it's in the book, and maybe you should read it. The son who I was confirming all this information with 2 years ago. Okay, that he said, yes, I lived right across from Cannon Air Force Base. Yes, here's a picture of my father in his military police uniform. He was chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base. Lived right across the street from it. I was there when he said he helped fake the moon landing and murdered somebody to cover it up. And a couple of days after giving me this information, right, two government agents show up at his house and threaten to kill him and his family if he ever talks to me again about his father's participation in the moon landing fraud. The White House was involved in investigating whistleblower protection for him. So was the FBI. So was the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. I don't think they would be doing all of that if they really went to the moon. And the fact is, the atomic bomb during World War II was this top secret. It
Yeah.
involved 129,500 people, and only 8 knew what they were building. Remember, Eugene Krantz said a guy in the command center can't tell the difference between a real flight and a practice one, right? So I don't think the CIA is so stupid to tell the person making the glove or the door handle or the boot, hey, we're really not going to the moon. Be sure not to tell anybody. If a guy in the command center can't tell the difference, and once they go up, there's no independent press coverage, and they launch satellites to fake transmissions coming from the moon, they obviously got away with it with the
So,
majority of
so
people.
for
It
what
was
you're
easier to fool
alleging to be true,
people.
though, for what you're alleging to be true, roughly 199,900 people or so would had to have been in the dark about what NASA was actually doing here, because only maybe 100 or so actually knew they were going to fake this whole thing, right? I
Yeah,
mean, essentially.
probably fewer than that. According to Bill Casing, who had second highest security clearance to von Braun, he read a memo from von Braun to the Pentagon warning that they were not going to make Kennedy's deadline, and if they tried, there was only a 1 in 10,000 chance of doing it on the first attempt. So they
Mhm.
bluffed, like in poker. And so, yeah, if you include food vendors and secretaries and people printing the paper, maybe it involved 400,000
Well,
people.
that's
But
the reason I brought it up, is
how many
because of that
bank tellers?
confession.
How many bank tellers? My estimate is that if you added up all the bank tellers at every branch of Wells Fargo or Bank of America, there'd be about 500,000 bank tellers. But you're saying what a bank teller knows about the corruption in the bank and the CEO knows are identical. Of course they're not. Everything is departmentalized. According to Bill Casing, he said as soon as a department became proficient, they would disband everybody, bring in new people. They did that over and over again, the exact opposite of what you would want to do if you were really going to the moon. So everyone was under the assumption that all this equipment worked. And like I said, if you see my film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, they can't even get a pole with a bag on the end of it to work six
Yeah.
weeks beforehand. 6 weeks beforehand, Neil Armstrong crashes the lunar lander test vehicle. Do you realize that Elon Musk, with 5 decades better technology, with 600 million times the computing power, the first time he tried to land a rocket vertically, it blew up. The second time, it blew up. The third time, it blew up. The fourth time, it blew up. On the fifth time, he landed a rocket vertically, but somehow, with 1/600 millionth the computing power, they landed a rocket vertically every single time. You know, come on, people.
Doesn't make
How
it.
much
No, you're
more
right. It
obvious
doesn't.
does
That
it
does
have to
not make
be?
sense. That does not make sense. I agree with you.
No.
But the reason I asked you about the deathbed confession and why only one out of X number of people is because there's other people involved. When I was watching that confession from Akers, talking about how his dad, said that, they brought in sand, like, truckloads of sand into the sound. Well, what became a sound stage. It was two hangars, right? They were kind of together, but they brought in all of this sand, and then they brought in concrete dust, concrete, powder to put on top of it to give it the right color and everything else, painted matte black, everything you said. And I'm thinking to myself, what did they have to do to keep those people silent? Truck drivers came in and dropped that stuff off and then cleaned it up and took it all out. All of the people who painted the walls, they had contractors there. Are we sure that none of them would have gone home and said, honey, you wouldn't believe what I had to do at work today? I took
Well, they
loads of
again,
sand into a
everybody.
hangar at the Air Force Base, and where they're shooting a fake moon landing. You see what I'm saying?
Well, one crew dumped it off, and another crew put it in before the lunar lander. Before, you see what I'm saying? They did it in stages so that people wouldn't get the full picture of what was going on. The people who did get the full picture, they were warned that they would be killed and their family would be killed if they told anybody. All the while, they claimed it was just to rehearse the moon landing, when obviously it was, what everyone saw on television. Cyrus Eugene Akers said when he saw the quote moon landing on TV, it was what was filmed inside the hangar. you know, so yeah, if they threatened to kill your children, right? If someone came to you, Bob, and said, if you go to work tomorrow, I'm gonna, and you knew they could do it. Okay, it's the CIA. We will kill, your mother, your father, your wife, and all your children if you go to work tomorrow. Would you go to work tomorrow? I don't
Was
think you would.
was all of Akers' family dead at the time that he made his confession, his deathbed confession? Because you know what I
Well,
mean? Again,
yeah.
I'm thinking the scope of people who knew what was going on there. Only one said something despite those threats, not just killing me. Hey, I'm on my deathbed, but they might kill my family. If I've got family still living, I'm still very, very worried about that. You would think there would be more than one person that than Akers who would have on their deathbed, if they had nothing else to lose, maybe they didn't have any family, that would have come forward. And I'm just looking at a common sense there. Like you said, it's
Well,
commonly
you
sensible
you
to say that if
repeated
Musk
the
can't do it with 600 million times the tech of what they had in 1969, common sense says they probably didn't do it on the first try. So I'm looking at it from a common sense standpoint here too, about other people and their own human failings and their own willingness to keep a secret or not, based on what the threat level against them has been.
well, the argument is it involved a lot of people when in fact people in the command center couldn't tell the difference, and they say, well, someone would have come forward. Well, someone did come forward. Someone who murdered somebody to cover up the moon landing fraud confessed before he died that he was a murderer. And the reason why he killed his coworker at Cannon Air Force Base was because they eyewitnessed the moon landing fraud. We've confirmed that President Johnson was there at that time. We've confirmed that one person on the list was there at that time. And some of the people on that list are still alive today. And somebody was listening to the phone calls of me and this man's son, because a couple of days later, his house was broken into. All the stuff about his father's participation in the moon landing fraud was taken, and two agents showed up face to face and threatened to kill him and his family for disclosing this information to me, which I publish in my book at Sibrel.com, including my interview with Betty Grissom and Scott Grissom, that they say that the crew that was going to be the first crew on the moon was murdered by the CIA. So come on. I don't know what
So
more to say.
so we're
People
doing
are
well.
have an
We have a lot
emotional
more to say.
attachment to
We
this.
have a lot more to say because we haven't gotten to the thing that I said 40 minutes ago I wanted to start with, and that is Van Allen. Because, and Dylan, pull up video clip 4, because this is one of the more compelling arguments that I think I've heard in this entire thing. And you can set this up and then we'll play it, Bart, and then I'll ask you a follow-up question on the other side of it. Tell us what we're about to watch here about
Well,
the
most
technical.
people don't know this, but high in the atmosphere above the Earth, starting at approximately 1,000 miles and extending approximately 30,000 miles, so it's 30,000 miles thick, is a band of radiation called the Van Allen radiation belt. It protects the Earth from solar and galactic radiation, and it is held in place by Earth's magnetic field. Every manned mission has been well below the radiation field, generally at about 250 miles. And again, it starts at 1,000 miles. So it's every manned mission, everyone has been below the radiation field except going to the moon. What you're about to see is NASA's own Kelly Smith in 2014 for the Orion project, which sent unmanned probes into the radiation with two Geiger counters. And he said it's dangerous radiation, meaning deadly. And then he says that the technology to put an astronaut in the radiation to the moon and back and survive, the technology necessary, the shielding to protect an astronaut from dying in the radiation, has not been invented yet. So, how did they go to the moon? And in fact, the footage we uncovered is them faking being halfway to the moon from Earth orbit.
Okay.
Apollo 11 never left Earth orbit. They can't leave Earth orbit 54 years later. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon. Take a look at it. NASA says the technology to survive going through the radiation field has not been invented yet.
My name is Kelly Smith, and I work on navigation and guidance for Orion. We are headed 3,600 miles above Earth, 15 times higher from the planet than the International Space Station. As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We won't have astronauts inside. We won't have astronauts inside. We won't have astronauts inside.
And there you go. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. Well, what are the challenges? To protect people from the radiation. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space, and that's why there are no people on the
So
rocket.
what has NASA said? What has NASA and what did those involved with Apollo and the entire mission say about the protective shields and so forth necessary to solve that in 1969?
Well, they said it wasn't deadly when it was. We have publications from von Braun, multiple publications from Scientific American Magazine, 1958, 1959, and 1961, where Van Allen, go to Sibrel.com, they're published on the homepage. He says that the radiation belt is lethal. And if you look at some of the videos, my book is interactive with 17 video links, one of which is a scientist saying when they sent up Geiger counters in the late 50s that it's 100 times a lethal dose. All they claimed is that it's not lethal. In fact, a scientist Boy Scout said that the proof that the radiation field is not deadly is the Apollo astronauts went to the moon and back. And yet we have a guy saying now with 50 years better technology that the technology to go through it and survive has not been invented yet. So get this, Bob. They had 2 Geiger counters in there. Now, if they really went to the moon 6 times, they would already have the radiation readings, right? But for some reason, they need to get them again. So they sent up 2 Geiger counters into the radiation field, do a U-turn, come back after the guy, said that the technology to survive going through it hasn't been invented yet. First, I said, can I talk to the guy? And they're like, well, we don't let them talk to reporters anymore. And then I said, well, give me those radiation readings. And then they said, get this, Bob, it's a military secret. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. If you sent probes to the sun to find out the temperature of the sun isn't a military secret. And if you sent probes to Jupiter to find out how much helium is in Jupiter's atmosphere, the amount of helium isn't a military secret. So why would an element of nature, how much radiation surrounds the Earth, be a military secret? Unless, of course, it would reveal that it's lethal, which it is. It's at least 100 times more than a lethal dose. They need 3 feet of water surrounding them, which is too heavy to get off the ground, or 1 foot of lead to go through it. Just to have a dental x-ray, right, which lasts 1/24th of a second, you get 1/8 of an inch of lead over your private parts, right? So this is so much more deadly than that. And they had 1/8 of an inch of aluminum around the spacecraft. We have Neil Armstrong faking being halfway to the moon from Earth orbit. They're faking being halfway to the moon, which means they cannot go halfway to the moon. They cannot leave Earth orbit. And that's why 50 years later, there's mannequins orbiting the moon. For some reason, you can play golf and drive cars on the moon with 1960s technology. But today, the best you can do is have mannequins orbit. I mean,
Okay.
and people
Let me ask,
think they went to the moon.
let me ask a dumb question about the impact of the radiation, not on man, because you just explained the lethality of it, but on the equipment, on the all of the incredibly sophisticated technology that is on the actual ship. He mentioned that the equipment could be impacted by that radiation. Clearly, the radiation isn't strong enough to impact it by the fact that we do have mirrors on the moon that have been put up there by the Chinese, unmanned trips to the moon, right? So we have an
Well, yeah,
unmanned trip to the moon. So
it,
the equipment has gotten through that radiation, the Van Allen
well,
belts.
yeah.
So
Because
if
here's
that's
why,
the case,
Bob. Okay,
maybe it's not as deadly as we thought.
no, it's
No.
completely different. I mean, here's why. You can X-ray a toaster 1,000 times, and it'll still make toast. X-ray a human being 1,000 times, and they're going to die. And so that's the difference. One is a living organism, and the other is a bunch of metal, right? You can X-ray it all you want, and it's still
But
going to make toast for
But
you.
what Kelly Smith there
Well,
said
well,
though,
he said that
isn't
because he was being sly and not saying humans, right? What he really meant was humans. It can have. I mean, come on, they're not concerned. The Orion project isn't concerned. Their number one concern, rather, isn't the equipment. Their number one concern is the astronauts. So funny, he didn't mention human beings in the radiation. I wonder why. Because it's another clue that that's a problem. So he tried to make it look like their concern was the equipment. Trust me, their greatest concern is the humans surviving going
so
through it.
so have there been any statements made by the other world superpowers that have indeed gone to the moon with unmanned crafts like China and Russia? What is their view of it? Is that the reason why they haven't gone and used manned missions because of the Van Allen, or have they not addressed that?
Well, no, that's exactly why they can't go. I mean, after Lewis and Clark went west, all those people, from everywhere went west. After Columbus came here, everybody started coming here. After they split the atom, I think the Soviet Union split the atom 2 or 3 years later. So you
So
would
once people
think
see that it can
if
be
you could
done, they
go to the
follow
moon
through.
on the first attempt,
Yeah.
everyone would be going to the moon 50 years
So
later, but
if
they
that's the
can't.
case, why wouldn't Russia and China be saying we can't get through that, and neither did they? How come
Well,
they're
here,
not
here's
blowing the
here's why.
whistle?
Here's why. Because I know somebody who works at the Chinese Space Agency. Okay. They told me, and I'm about to upload another. There's a video up there right now saying this on my YouTube channel, but I'm about to upload another one about it. They said everybody there knows that the moon missions are fake and they are blackmailing NASA for space technology in exchange for not blowing the whistle on it. Now, that's, of course, the government's already killing people, lying and embezzling. So, what is it to break the Espionage Act? See, traitors are Americans. They're giving our alleged enemy space technology to build space stations and potentially space missiles in exchange for being blackmailed to not expose the moon landing fraud. The same with Russia. I mean, that's the alleged defense. Well,
Why do
Russia
they
and
need
China
our
blew the
technology though?
whistle.
I mean, if we're no better than they are, and we weren't able to get through the Van Allen belt, and we weren't able to go to the moon any more than they were, what tech do we have that would be so much more advanced than they
Well,
have that they would accept that as payment for keeping the big secret?
it's
That
not that it's more advanced; it's that it's more developed. Uh, Basically,
they're
the
synonymous, aren't they?
the Chinese space station is a clone of the United States space station, and by copying it, they're able to manufacture it years ahead of schedule. So that's what they did. So the fact the Chinese space station and the U.S. space station could dock with one another because they're identical. Where did they get those blueprints from? They got them from the United States, even though Congress said you're not allowed to do that. They broke the
So
law. What a surprise.
why would the US do this now? Why wouldn't they just say, screw you, we're not giving you any more technology, we're not giving you any more of our advanced space tech. Blow the whistle if you want, because we're just going to say you're communists, you're liars. We kind of don't trust
Well, I
anything
don't think
Russia
so.
says
I don't
now.
think
We
so
don't trust
because
anything China says
with
now.
the
They're
with
communists.
the yeah, with the probes that China has sent to the moon, they might even have one right there on the surface at the Apollo 11 alleged landing site with nothing there. And pictures, flyovers. You see, they have proof that we didn't go to the moon. Russia has proof, and that's one of the alleged excuses why it must be real. China and Russia would have blown the whistle. Not really. I could have a picture of a world leader with a
But why would
prostitute,
the
and
world believe them? Why would the world believe their quote unquote proof? I mean,
well,
with AI, what it is now, you just talked about
I
AI.
think they would.
With the
You
ability
know,
to fake images that they want would be probably easier than our ability to fake the entire mission. That you're saying that we did. I mean, they
well,
could fake.
no, again, this is an argument that's opposite of the truth, that the easiest explanation is the truthful one. And the fact is, it's easier to pretend to go to the moon than to actually go. That's why the film The Martian wasn't shot on location on Mars. They created a
No,
TV
that's
studio
not what I'm saying.
because
I'm
that's
not saying
easier.
it's easier. No,
Yeah,
no, no.
but here's
What
the
I'm
thing.
saying
What
is,
would happen? Just a thought experiment here, Bob.
all right.
What would happen if the truth came out? Let's say America acknowledged it. Let's say Buzz Aldrin went on national TV and said, "I'm tired of living this lie." What would happen? Well, it would dramatically ruin the reputation of the United States. The
Mhm.
stock market would crash, the dollar would crash, and everyone would say they're a bunch of liars. And it could, because I showed the footage, okay, of them faking being halfway to the moon to a director at NBC News who said it absolutely proves they did not leave Earth orbit and therefore faked the moon missions. And he refused to broadcast it for fear it would cause a civil war. Because this is different than who shot JFK or who did 9/11. People got down on their knees and they prayed and they cried and they waved their flag. They printed it on coins and stamps, put it in an encyclopedia, and gave them medals of honor for being such good liars. He said if the public finds out that that is a lie, the federal government will come down. That's why they're so concerned about it. That's why there's all these videos to support this straw construction of we went to the moon that wouldn't have to be defended with 1,000 videos if they really went, because there is a lot of evidence. Many filmmakers are saying it was shot with electrical light because it was. And people are in denial about it because it's glorious and it has become a god for them. The fact is, the smarter thing than me uploading a world leader picture with a prostitute, which would take them down, but then the picture would be worthless, would be to blackmail them year after year. The Soviets are blackmailing the United States. China, for employee who works there, said they're blackmailing the United States over the moon landing fraud because the American government is highly concerned. If the truth came out, it would bring them down.
Two of
And
the
that's
most
why all these people are making all these videos to reassure people. For example,
two of the most important ones.
wait,
Mark,
let me
let me
add
get
one
into
thing.
one. Let me get
About
into
a
one more.
year ago, about a year ago, not only do we have just in November the smartest AI saying the pictures from Apollo are fake, which means Google wasted $1 billion and they're completely incompetent, or the moon pictures are fake, right? A year and a half ago, the former director of the Russian space agency, okay, publicly said, made the news, the moon missions are fake. Fox News calls me up the very next day. They say we're going to do an hour-long special. Since the guy just said the day earlier that the moon missions are fake, Fox News wants to do an hour-long special about whether they went to the moon or not. And they tell me, get this, Bob, they say, we haven't read your book. We haven't seen your evidence in your films. And irregardless of what's in there, we will conclude that the moon missions are real to reassure people. Fox News is not your friend. RT is not your friend. Why?
But
Putin was there.
doesn't that sort of prove what I was just saying, though, Bart?
What's that?
If the Russian says they faked it, okay, Fox News says, "Oh my gosh, we're going to do a big special on this. We're going to go
But
talk
they
to
but
Bart
they didn't
Sibrel."
cover that. Let me finish, okay? So I watched their hour-long special, and what they showed, okay, was a Russian scientist in 1969. They found one quote from one Russian scientist in 1969 and who said congratulations, and then their voiceover said, therefore the Russians believe that it was real. They did not mention that 6 weeks earlier, the former director of the Russian space agency said it was fake. They deleted that. So they didn't show that. They suppressed it. Just like the AI story is being suppressed. You hadn't heard of it. No
No.
one's heard of it. If you click on the original link of the AI proving that the moon missions are fake, it threatens to take all the data off your computer and associate you with child pornography. That's how desperate they are to suppress this. I talked to people in the military. People in the military. I said, well, what about the third building that collapsed on 9/11? They're like, well, what third building? Never heard of it. You see how successful they are at suppressing the truth? It's not publicly known that the former Russian space agency director said it was fake. It's not publicly known that the AI just declared the moon missions are fake. Fox News is suppressing it. RT is suppressing it because Russia is blackmailing the United States
That's
over it.
that's that's kind of the point I was trying to make, though, is we don't trust anything the Russians say. The two words are two of the most important words over the last 8 years have been Russian disinformation. They tried to blackmail Trump. I'm sorry, they colluded with Trump. They created the fake laptop for Hunter Biden. Russian disinformation. In other words, we can always blame the boogeyman. So if we stop paying them with quote unquote tech or scientific advancement and so forth, and they said, okay, we're going to tell the world that you guys didn't go there, what's the American government going to do? And how hard would it be to convince them that it's just the Russians lying again? It's just the Chinese communists who are enemies. We're geopolitical foes. They're coming into the United States to destroy the United States. They're buying up farmland. They're using spy balloons. They've got tens of thousands of percent increase in foreign nationals coming into the U.S. from China. It's just more Chinese and Russian games if they say we didn't go to the moon. Well,
Well,
who's going to believe them, right?
maybe, but the fact is, Bob, though, what would happen if the truth came out? We're speculating now. Maybe I'm more optimistic than you, and maybe I shouldn't be. But people used to believe that the Earth was the center of the universe, and then there was a paradigm shift, right? When they realized that the Earth orbits the sun, and something changed. The doctrine changed, the thinking changed virtually overnight, and that can happen again. People can accept the fact that they did lie. They were able to pull it off. I mean, the CIA, if they want a city boy to infiltrate a bunch of farmers, they will put dirt under his fingernails that was retrieved from the same soil of where he's supposed to have his farm. They will do that. That's what they did with the moon
Yeah.
landing fraud. Neil Armstrong claims he picked up a rock personally, put this rock in his pocket, and saved it for the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who he met a few weeks later. Gave him the rock. They put it in a hermetically sealed box, and it's sat in a museum for decades. Until a curator apparently watched my film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, opened it up at night, put it under a microscope, and it ends up being petrified wood. No one does a story. In fact, the story, a little bit of a story leaked out. Isn't it interesting? A moon rock proves to be fake. No one asks if the moon rock is fake. What about the moon missions? So we have the first NBC News director looking at the footage I uncovered. He says it absolutely proves they didn't go to the moon. He refuses to broadcast it for fear it would cause a civil war. 10 years later, another NBC News director looks at it. They say, we're going to break the story nationwide. They fly me to New York, put me up in the Waldorf Astoria, pay me thousands of dollars for the exclusive license. They interview me, ready to go. They get a call from the federal government threatening them, and they back down and don't broadcast it. You see, they really did fake the moon landing. Two NBC News directors agree.
Call from whom? Who did they get a call from when you say the federal government? Who called them and threatened them to make them pull that?
They didn't mention names. They just said someone from the federal government called them up.
CIA, Pentagon, White House,
whoever it would be, somebody who scared them, who scared NBC News into complying, and who scared them into throwing thousands of dollars of investment away, and in doing what is right.
Bart, I want to do one more thing here with you because this is a big part of the evidence that you present in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon and in all of your research at Sibrel.com. So this is number 2, Dylan, and this is the halfway to the moon part of the story that Bart has been talking about many, many times. Faking being halfway to the moon and using images of the Earth through the spacecraft's window and the truth of this. Now, how long is this video that we have? This
well, I mean, it's about a minute, and it's up to you, but you could go full screen on this just to make sure people can see it as best as possible. But basically,
can you
on
zoom
the
that?
right, Yeah, I mean, you could. I mean, I'm talking about getting rid of us on the side if you wanted to, although that's fine. I mean, but you could make it bigger to make it a little bit more discernible. But the point is, we found a classified tape of fake photography that at the very beginning of it says, do not show to the public. And everything from NASA is pre edited, pre voiceovered, and polished up. This is raw, unedited footage of outtakes of a fake shot. They are creating a 1 foot model of the Earth, pretending to be halfway to the moon. It's in my film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. Watch it for free at Sibrel.com. It was financed by a millionaire who builds rockets for NASA, who knows the moon missions are fake, who thought it was his patriotic duty to expose it. I'm producing the film under the theory it might be true that they faked it. I don't know. But a lot of things didn't add up. I find this tape. On the right hand side is the part that they showed to the public. And you can see in blue, we actually, type the text of the quote. It's Armstrong saying, this is Apollo 11 calling in from 130,000 miles out, or about halfway to the moon. He explains that there's only one window that faces the Earth, and it's completely blocked with the TV camera, meaning, of course, you'd have to put the lens at the glass to shoot that Earth. So he's trying to convince the audience at home that they're far away from the Earth, and there we are looking at it in a distance. What we have on the left hand side is the unedited version. And in fact, the camera is not up against the glass like it would have to be. It's at the back of the coupled spacecrafts, which is kind of deep. They've turned out the lights, all of which they talk about because they thought these conversations would be edited out. And what you're actually seeing is a circular window of the spacecraft, which is filled with the Earth and low Earth orbit. They even insert a little crescent piece of material to make it look like the Terminator line between night and day. You can go ahead and hit play. You'll hear Neil Armstrong lie, claiming he's 130,000 miles out. And then we'll see the unedited version on the left, where you see it's really the window. And you'll see Neil Armstrong kind of, breaking down the fake 1 foot model of the Earth, which is backlit from the circular window. Go
We
ahead and
will
hit play.
we will fill the screen, by the way, in post to make sure everybody can see
Oh,
this.
okay, sure.
So go ahead.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Okay, so that's supposed to be the Earth floating in space. Now let's take a look at it over here, right? And let's take a look at it. Okay, so to the right is 130,000 miles out, according to NASA and Neil Armstrong, right? That's the Earth over there on the right. But wait a minute, it's not. It's the window. They're using a 1 foot diameter circular photograph of the Earth, putting it on top of the circular window. And now here they are breaking down the shot, the photograph, in order to get ready for an interior showing the astronauts. You know what I mean? So there they are. There's proof right there that it's a fake shot. Here's even an outtake here when an astronaut's arm gets in front of the window. Look at this. Oh my goodness. So if that's really the Earth floating in space, that must be the arm of God going right in front of it. Oh my goodness. So this is the smoking gun. This is them faking being halfway to the moon. Okay.
So when I asked you a short while ago if there was any one piece of evidence that is like the go-to one, this is your go-to. More than the
Well,
shadow.
in a way, really, the shadows intersecting at 90 degrees would prove it in a court of law. All you got to do is take the jury out, show them, 2 trees, 2 telephone poles, 2 people in the parking lot, and then come back in the courtroom, which has no windows, turn off the lights, bring in a close electrical light or 2 electrical lights, and have the shadows intersect. And you'll
Sure.
see that if shadows intersect at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart, then it's lit with an electrical light, which means they're on Earth, which means they didn't go to the moon. And that's why Neil Armstrong is faking being halfway to the moon. Now, me personally, that is what convinced me. This took $1 million to produce these films. It took 7 years to make A Funny Thing Happen on the Way to the Moon. I spent 4,000 hours editing that 45-minute film. And halfway into it, I pop in that tape that says, do not show to the public. Again, you can see the film for free at Sibrel.com. And I'm like, that's not the window, is it? No, that's not the window. And then the lights come up and it's the window. And even better, and I think Dylan has it queued up, at the very beginning of it, we hear a third track of audio of the CIA. You know, we hear NASA, it kind of has that walkie talkie kind of EQ sound. We hear the astronauts, kind of has that walkie talkie EQ sound. So the first audio at the beginning of it, if you want to cue that up, we hear NASA say the TV picture looks great, according to, you know, somebody else, because they're not actually getting the live feed. And then there's 4 seconds of dead air. And then we hear a third party that's not NASA, not the astronauts, say, talk. And then Neil Armstrong speaks. So what they're doing is, because he's really in Earth orbit, only 250 miles above the Earth, they would have a back and forth conversation like we're having. How are you? I'm fine. How was your day? Well, I'm pretty good. But if they answer quickly, it gives away the fact that they're near the Earth. They're supposed to be halfway to the moon, and therefore they estimated 2 seconds out, 2 seconds back. So someone counted off 4 seconds. We have them faking a 4 second radio delay, being prompted by the CIA to not talk until 4 seconds go by. You can cue that up and play that audio. We have 3 people on there. According to NASA, there's only 2 people, NASA and the astronauts, right? It's a civilian mission, but that's not the case. We have somebody telling Neil Armstrong through an earpiece not to speak to NASA right away. They count off 4 seconds, and then we hear talk. I think you'll, if you check that on the
This is the
list
30,
there,
3423, right? 3423. That is that
yeah,
where we're
you
queued
can
up
make
to?
that full screen, and that's what first caught my attention. So the sequence of me, you know, realizing they really did fake the moon landing through this footage was when I heard a third party of audio talking to them secretly. I'm like, well, what is that about? And go ahead and
Okay.
take a listen to it.
Call Apollo 11. Houston, Goldstone says that the TV looks great. Over. Sure. Okay, Roger. We're wrapping in on Earth.
You see that? They're being prompted not to speak until 4 seconds go by. Why? Because that is the window of the spacecraft that has part of the Earth outside of it from Earth orbit, and it looks like the Earth floating in space. You see, they're faking being halfway to the moon. Even my critics agree that's them faking being halfway to the moon. 2 NBC News directors agree that footage proves they did not go to the moon because they're faking being halfway to the moon. The thing is time stamped 2 days into the flight, and the Earth is filling up the window. So they're still in Earth orbit 2 days into the flight. They're supposed to be walking on the moon the next day, 3 days journey away, which they can't do. So if they're faking being halfway to the moon, they can't go halfway. They can't leave Earth orbit. And what a surprise, 50 years later, they still can't leave Earth orbit. That's why there's mannequins leaving Earth orbit because of the radiation that NASA admits the technology to protect you from has not been invented yet. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. That's why they destroyed all the technology, the schematics, because you could prove technically that they couldn't have gone to the moon. There it is. They
Was
faked the
this
moon landing. It's not a
was this
theory.
film,
What can you do?
Bart? Was this film part of what was fed into the Google AI? And it said fake.
No, they fed in still pictures from
Okay.
Apollo 11, which it was amazing how the AI said they were fake for multiple reasons. One picture they showed, it's really interesting. The people who knew it was fake said this must be a really huge set. Well, actually, it was a miniature. The AI said that that is not an astronaut, that's a doll, that is a miniature. The AI saw, in order to do this vast landscape, instead of having this huge, you know, airplane hangar, which they probably did on one occasion, they created a miniature set of it, a miniature lunar module, a miniature. They do that in film all the time. It looks very real. I'm fooled all the time by this. And apparently, somebody had to have, like on a stick, a little astronaut boot print, and they went and they kind of pretended, you know, to make boot prints. The AI saw it and said, humans don't walk that way, you know, and, you know, therefore it's man-made. They said the background was fake, the foreground was fake, it's a miniature. And people have been saying, photographic experts, that this footage of the lunar rover driving around is a miniature. I didn't pick up on that, but other photographic experts did. This footage,
Interesting.
however, is them faking being halfway to the moon. The camera is not up against the glass like he claimed. He lied. The camera's at the back of the spacecraft. They turned out the lights. It looks like, the Earth floating in space because that's the window of the spacecraft that's shaped like a circle with part of the Earth outside of it, and it looks clever. If I had just seen, the part they broadcast, I probably wouldn't have figured it out. But we have the unedited version that even has a third track of audio of someone telling them not to speak until 4 seconds go by to fake a 4 second radio delay as if they're halfway to the moon and back. And my critics agree that that is them faking being halfway to the moon. But they say, well, somehow they went to the moon anyway. Now, if two NBC news directors and myself and other photographic experts and filmmakers say that's them faking being halfway to the moon from Earth orbit, it is. And I don't know what to say to these Boy Scouts who say a confession from Neil Armstrong that it was fake, that they'd still believe it was real anyway. I mean, that just proves how irrational they're being and stamping it with science, just like a used car salesman says it was stamped with approval by the Used Car Salesman's Association. You know,
So I
and like
do.
I said, the CIA has a long history of giving credibility, putting dirt under people's fingernails that came from this soil, and they faked the moon rocks, they faked the photography, and it was easier to do than they believed because there's no independent press coverage like World War II. We have to take their word for it. And then we have the entire population predisposed to wanting to believe it's true. Again, whoever killed Kennedy, he's dead. Whoever did 9/11, they're dead. This is a positive lie. It's easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. And if a college professor teaching aerospace says out of his own mouth, a confession from Neil Armstrong that it was fake, that he would still believe he walked on the moon anyway, these people are irrational. That's why they get mad.
Just have
That's why the guy says, I will not produce a debunking video, and then he produces a debunking video. He says it makes me mad. How dare you dishonor NASA and these great, accomplishment? The guy's clouded with emotions. I used to believe it was real. I thought it was glorious. I had a shrine in my house
I
of
want to get
pictures,
you two guys
you
together.
know?
I want to get you two
Well,
guys together. Mister, I'm pissed and
I, I'm
this
not
happened.
interested in debating the victims of the deceptive federal government. I'm interested in debating Charles Duke, the guy who has the audacity to call himself a Christian while he's accomplice and accessory to multiple homicides. Put him up. Put the administrator of NASA up, who thinks it's dark on the far side of the moon all the time. I
Well,
mean,
I know
that's
you
the
tried. You
administrator of
tried to
NASA.
debate. You tried to debate Buzz Aldrin, and he ripped off his microphone and said, "We're done. Turn that camera off. Get out of here."
Well,
This
if you watch that film, he made two admissions that I'm correct. First, he said, and this makes you a real famous person for having discovered this. What an ego you must have to want to propel your career like this. Well, how could I become famous if I'm wrong? And then, secondly, he said, we were just passengers
yeah.
going on a flight. You see, no one landed. He's passengers because at that point, my company was called ABC Digital, right? I did that to appear alphabetically first in the yellow pages. And so he mistook that for ABC News. I had two professional cameras,
Smart.
monitor,
Don't
security
blame you.
guard. He thought at that moment the story had broken worldwide that the moon missions were fake. That's when he said, oh, and you're just doing this to become famous. How could I become famous if I'm wrong? And then he said we were just passengers orbiting the Earth for 8 days. Talked to the administrator of NASA. And then when he realized he had made two admissions of guilt, he said, if you show this to anybody, I'll sue you. Cue it up. Show the little girl. Show the elderly man, maybe a little senile, maybe he's still drinking. And he said to the little girl, just like Neil Armstrong said to the students, maybe someday you'll be able to remove truth's protective layers. Buzz Aldrin said to the little girl who asked, why can't we go back? He says, well, because we didn't go. And if we didn't go, it's good to know why we didn't go there. People
Well, Les,
can,
I've got to,
untruth it or whatever they want to do.
I've
Fact
got to
check.
put the
Well,
wraps
what
on
he
this.
really meant was, I mean, come on. Well,
No,
the
I got.
reason why the shadows intersect, and the reason why the guy, I mean, come on. The reason why they're faking being halfway to the moon, they have an excuse for that too. Do you realize that? They admit that that's them faking the photography of the moon mission, which you would never have to do if you really went. Do you
if you
realize
will.
that? And
I
if they
do.
really went, they wouldn't dare fake any of it. There's a film coming out next month. They don't tell you much about it, but it talks about faking the moon missions as a backup. I have the suspicion they're going to say, well, we really went, but we just, shot it as a backup and some of that footage got leaked in. If you really went to the moon, the last thing you would do would be shoot anything fake because then you would be accused of having faked the whole thing. So the
How many
fact that
Apollo
they're
missions?
faking any of the photography proves it was fake.
How many Apollo missions resulted in men walking on the moon?
6 allegedly.
6 of them. All of your focus and our focus has been on the first one.
Well, not
If
really.
did
Well,
they get
the
any
foot
better at did they get better at faking them 2 through 6? Or how
well,
come
not
we don't
really.
have any of the same kinds of
Actually, the opposite. Once people accepted that they were on the moon, they became actually a little bit less proficient. The pictures of the shadows intersecting, that's from the last
that
mission
was
to the
from
moon.
17, right? Right.
Correct. Then we have from Apollo 11 the footage of them faking being halfway to the moon with the third track of audio of the CIA telling them to fake a 4-second radio delay to make it look like they're not in Earth orbit when they
Weren't there
really
any
are.
more of these deep fakes, as we would call them today, deep fakes? Weren't there any more of those from the other missions?
There's
Because
a lot of photographic proof, them falling over and suddenly being pulled up by a bungee cable, which they used to, simulate jumping a little bit higher off the Earth. And a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. They just used slow motion. And one of the things that we do is we double the speed, and you see they're only getting like half an inch off the surface when they probably should be able to leap about 6 feet into the air, which they never did on any mission. And apparently later they put in like bungee cables or something.
Mm.
And one time the guy's like, falled over like this and suddenly he bounces up. Of course, they make an excuse for that too. But whatever, I don't know what to say. It's not a theory they faked it. It's a fact. It's a sad fact. And these people are at large, running the world, running our government, killing people, deceiving us, and then naive Boy Scouts are defending their own molesters. I don't know what to say. What can you do?
One more real quick thing before you go, just regarding that the video of them faking being halfway to the moon. You said a few different times, we found this film and it said do not show to the public. What does that mean, we found? Where'd you get it?
Well, Bill Casing believes a whistleblower sent it to us intentionally. I was producing the film under the theory it might be true that they faked it. Again, I'm a big moon landing fan. And yet the shadows intersect at 90 degrees, and I'd become a filmmaker. A filmmaker's job is to make fake scenes look real. And I'm like, it sure looks like electrical lighting to me. I wonder why that is. Then I find out 2 of the 3 astronauts won't give interviews. Then I find out the administrator of NASA resigned without explanation before becoming famous. Then I find out the Soviets launched the first satellite, the first animal, the first man, the first woman, the first spacewalk, the first crew of 3, the first 2 spacecrafts at the same time, had spent 50 hours in space for every 10 of ours, never went to the moon. It's like, so something's off about this, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And then I pop in that tape, and it's like, oh, they're faking being halfway to the moon, which means they didn't go. Oh my gosh. And so what I did is I told NASA that I'm doing a documentary about the moon landings, which is true. I'm not going to say, hey, can you send me some proof that they didn't go? I figured if they faked it, they're more likely to have made a mistake the first time they faked it because they never faked it before. And I went through everything. I said, send me every still picture, every video, every film footage, and there's very little footage from the first mission. It's the same thing edited over and over again. Of an astronaut on the surface of the moon from Apollo 11, there's probably only 20 pictures or fewer, and 0 of Neil Armstrong. There's a TV image of him. There's a motion picture image of him, allegedly from the side of the lunar
Wait a minute,
module.
which one of them mounted
Not a
the
single
flag?
picture.
Which one of them mounted that flag? That famous picture of him standing next to the flag. That's not Neil?
Well, that's a TV image. It's not a still picture. When you
Oh,
and
but
I
that's
go
from the video.
to
Got it.
Yeah, when you and I go to Paris, right, we're going to take pictures of us with the Eiffel Tower in the background and probably 20 of them. There's only one picture of the Earth in the background, and it's very tiny up in the sky. It should be right over the horizon the entire time on every mission, and it should be 4 times bigger than a full moon. Everybody would want a picture of them in front of the Eiffel Tower, and every astronaut would want a picture of them with the Earth behind them. But they couldn't fake it with it rotating and the weather patterns matching. They couldn't do it. So they just ignored it, you see? And so my point is, I went through everything. I popped in a tape. It said, don't show to the public. What was on the label and on the tape were two different things. Either they made a clerical error and no one discovered it because every other reporter was satisfied with the first few reels to do their story, which is probably the case. I meticulously went through everything. I found a mistake. And or someone intentionally sent it to me, a whistleblower. That is them faking being halfway to the moon. Two NBC news directors agree. Multiple filmmakers agree. My critics agree. They're faking being halfway to the moon. They wouldn't do that if they really went.
Fascinating.
As
It's a
simple as that.
fascinating trove of evidence that you've presented. It really is, and like I said, I'm really interested to see how other people feel about this. I notice you're not on too much social media. You have Sibrel.com, but you don't have a Twitter page and other places where you can
Eh,
interact. You're
it's
just
a, it's a it's a time it's a time funnel. You know, it would
it
just suck
is
my time
exactly that.
away.
I will admit. I
You
will
know,
admit it is that.
I do email and I do a website, and that's more than enough. And I'm backed up all the time on emails.
I
The
get it.
interesting thing about the book that just came out is I go into all the information that's not in the movie, including my interviews with relatives of astronauts who say they were murdered, Apollo astronauts, by the CIA. I also go into my bizarre espionage encounters with the CIA that would make a feature film of itself. Where I, after I found this footage, was literally followed from church late at night on a Wednesday. They, my car was disabled as I'm driving down the road. I was being chased by people on foot out in the middle of the interstate. I hired a cab to drive me to CNN. As I'm at the back door of CNN to get the tape in to a reporter friend who works there, I'm surrounded by government agents who take the tape. They drug me with truth serum to the point of vomiting, interrogate me, where's the original and whatnot. I escape their custody, make my way back to Nashville, and I pee in a cup. I say, I got him. I'm going to prove I was drugged by this exotic drug. So, trying to outwit the CIA, I give it to a friend to put in a lab in his name. Well, he calls me back up, or we meet, I think, a couple of days later, and I'm like, okay, so let's see the lab report because I know I'm gonna get him with this. NBC news director is waiting for this result, and he says, well, there was a problem at the lab, and I'm like, what problem? He says, well, they had a break in over the weekend. And I'm like, yeah, well, so what? He says, well, funny thing. The only thing stolen was your urine sample. So somehow the people at the lab are like, we don't know who you are, but take your business elsewhere. So we have that happening to me, which I talk about for the very first time in the book. And that's at Sibrel.com. I read it in
Do
audio
you
Kindle.
do you go into
Plus,
that? Do you
what's
go into
that?
this in as a part of that story?
Yeah,
You
I go
kind of
into
you, well, no,
enormous
hold
detail.
on, hold on. You
Yeah.
kind of lost me with I escaped. Now I'm thinking if the CIA captured you at the door there where you're delivering this tape and peeing in a cup of if they capture you, I'm picturing Jack Bauer. I'm picturing agents who are experts in the field. How do you escape from the CIA?
Well, they use their own people, and there are good people in the government. I talk about this. I have a chapter in the book called "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to CNN" and "A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Church." I was, you could say, rescued by a couple of good guys in the government who, as best as I could tell, were with Marine intelligence, called the MCIA, Marine Corps Intelligence Activity Department. And apparently, there's factions fighting over this, factions fighting over right and wrong in our government. And I guess by mutual agreement, they agree to have it fly below the radar. But there's like a civil war going
Okay.
on in the government. I've met, people
I'm
from
glad I
both
asked
sides.
that question because I'm picturing you trying to pick your cuffs, as you're being held by these people. And I broke out and I escaped. And so there had to have been another
Yeah,
element to
I
that.
go
So
into
it's all
great
covered up in the
detail
book.
as to what they
Okay.
did to me legally and how, when I was being abducted by them. There was this lawyer who had a back alley address that I guess was the cheapest way to have a CNN center address, right? Back alley, 100 square feet. And he walked out at that very moment, I was being illegally detained. And had that not happened, and I started telling him I'm a journalist being illegally arrested, and he got out his notepad, I may not be having this conversation with you today. So
That's great.
for the first time, I go into all this serendipity. This is right and wrong, as you know. I suspect just from looking at you, Bob, you believe in right or wrong, and what we understand here is that mankind's greatest accomplishment, you see, is putting a man on the moon. You know what they said about the largest machine built at the technological age, the Titanic? It's the ship that God Himself cannot sink. And Nixon said when he knew they weren't there, putting a man on the moon is second in greatness only to God making the universe. This is the crowning achievement of mankind by the crowning government of the earth, and it's totally corrupt and a total lie. This is a spiritual symbolism as well. This is the way that it is. They did fake the moon landing. And what does that mean? It means our world is so much more corrupt than we possibly realize. There are sincere people who are anti corruption who are like, I know the government's gotten bad, but at least we went to the moon. Tucker Carlson said, when I first heard that the president's private phone conversations are being monitored by the NSA, I said that's as absurd as the moon landings being fake. And it ended up being true, didn't it? You see,
Well, there
they
you go.
are that arrogant. When Clinton was asked after he denied it 20 times, right? How many times have they denied that the moon landings are fake? When he finally got caught and admitted he did have an affair, a reporter asked him why. And he said, because I could. Because I could get away with it. Why did they fake the moon landing? Why did they kill Kennedy? Why did they do the Gulf of Tonkin? Because they could. That's the people running our country. They're arrogant, murdering, thieving gangsters. And the moon landing fraud, if exposed, will bring them down. And that's why they're doing everything they can to prop it up. They want a Boy Scout, like these scientists who have made a god out of this.
Well, they have to now.
They
They
want
have.
sincere people. They want people who sincerely believe it lying for them because they're not technically lying. Put up an astronaut. I dare you. I dare you to put up Charles Duke with me. I dare you to put up the NASA administrator with me. They won't do it. They're cowards. They will not
Well,
do it.
the
They will
country is
not
almost.
face their accuser. I'm not
Yeah,
accusing their victims. I'm accusing them.
the country is almost 250 years old. If it becomes 250,000 years old someday, they're never going to be able to let this get out because of what you said at the beginning. If it gets out, civil war, everything that everybody has ever believed in about the government then goes out the window if this is exposed as a hoax. So you're going to die, I'm going to die without ever anything being told any differently. And it's a fascinating thing. Bart, I appreciate you doing this. I know you do a lot of interviews and you were really trying to get this stuff out there. I'll tell people to do. It's on the screen too, Sibrel.com. If you want to watch that, watch the videos that you have in sync with the book. If you get the book, Moon Man. But I really appreciate you doing this, and thanks very much for the time.
You too, Bob. I appreciate that you are a truth seeker. You know, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And pride is simply the unwillingness to admit that I'm wrong. We have to be able to admit that we're wrong. Every chapter ends with a quote. There's one from Men in Black 3 that actually has the Apollo launch as part of the plot. He says, the bitterest truth is better than the sweetest lie. We have to face facts that we have cancer in our country. We have to admit it and then move on and make the world and our country a better place because of it.
Words to live by right there. Thank you, Bart.
Sure.
That's going to do it for Strictly Speaking. Thanks for watching. Make sure you share this link with everybody that you know. Tell them about True Blue. Tell them where they can watch it. And we'll see you next time right here on Strictly Speaking.